begin
Okay.
with
Okay, little boy.
some basic stuff.
Okay.
So, tell us your name and why you were named that.
My name is Zelda Golub, but my maiden name was Zelda Solitsky. I'm named after my grandfather, who died just a few months before I was born. And I was named after a man, which is uncommon for Jewish religions. You're generally named after a person who is a man. A boy is named after a man, but they transpose it. My name became Zelda, and his Jewish name was Shleima. And then when my brother was born, he was given the same name as my grandfather. And his name was called Sidney in the American naming, but the Jewish name, his name was Shleima, after my grandfather.
When were you born?
I was born August 30th, which is coming up soon, 1917. I'll be 89 years old.
Right. Okay. Where were you born?
I was born in Williamsburg, New York, which is across the bridge, the Williamsburg Bridge from Brooklyn to Williamsburg. And I was born at home because years ago, women didn't go to the hospital. They had their children at home. And I was a third daughter for my parents. And my father says he loved me just as much if I were a boy.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about the oldest people you knew when you were a child. So we go back really far.
Yes, the oldest people I remember were my father's parents. And my grandfather lived close by, and at that time we lived in Manhattan on 109th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenue. And my grandfather used to come to the house, and we lived in it was a 6 or 7 story building, and we lived on the 4th floor. And my grandfather would come to the house, and he would bring us little bars of chocolate and candy kisses when he came downstairs. He didn't walk up because he was elderly. And his wife at that time had passed away, I remember, just a few years, and then he remarried another woman. And they lived, I remember when we used to go to visit them, they lived also in a high rise, but all the apartments were on one floor, and there was just one bathroom that we had to use. All the families used just the one bathroom that had a bathtub and a toilet bowl. No showers at that time. And we would go to visit them quite regularly.
Okay. So.
That was my father's
Okay.
parents.
Okay. And your mother's parents?
My mother's mother died in childbirth, and my grandfather remarried her sister, who was able to take care of my mother and brought her up. And I remembered her as being called Bubby. She was my grandmother. And when we lived on 109th Street, she lived on 3rd Avenue around the corner. And I remember the elevator train passing by her windows all the time. And one of my mother's brothers lived with her when her husband passed away. They moved from Schenectady, New York, back to Brooklyn.
Okay. So tell us about your life as a child. For instance, what kind of chores you had to do typically, what kind of things you did for fun, like on a weekend?
I remember, I had 2 older sisters, and I had a younger brother at that time, and we always played together. And we would play in the hallways. I remember walking up and down the steps. We didn't have schoolyards or places to play outdoors in those days, so we did most of our playing indoors. And in the summertime, we lived outside on the fire escapes. My mother would have books that she would try to read, but she would tell us stories about Judaism that she knew, and she knew how to read Hebrew, so she would tell us stories. And my father on Sunday would take us in the carriage. My brother was small at that time, and the 4 children, we were 2 older sisters and my youngest brother at that time. We would walk to 5th Avenue to Central Park, And there my father would rent a rowboat and he would take us rowing for a couple of hours, and then he would take us back, and they had a small zoo at that time. He would take us to the zoo, and then we would walk home, and my mother would have lunch ready. And another very popular thing at that time, the Jewish theater was very, very prominent at that time, and we'd go to see Molly Picon, if you remember her name, on a stage play, and then the family would sit together on a Sunday afternoon and go to the plays. And my mother and father were very active in their temple, and we would go to services whenever we could, weather permitting, because we had no means of transportation, we had to walk. And that's what I remember.
So tell us about school.
When I started kindergarten, my sisters were in the elementary school, which